Morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Trainer, and I'm the Chair of the Joint Authority and Canal Corporation's Audit Committee. Welcome members, John Kamel, Tracy McGibbon, Beth Gonzalez, and Michael Balboni. Welcome NIPA staff, members who are participating. This is a scheduled committee meeting, which has been duly noticed as required by the Open Meetings Law. I call this regular meeting to order. We'll begin with the adoption of the agenda. Do any other committee members have any amendments to the proposed agenda?
In progress.
No,
I'll move it.
Okay, so I ask for a motion to
Well,
approve the agenda.
Dennis, I just asked that we move the exec session from the front end to the back end of the meeting. So we have the opportunity to interact with KPMG at the conclusion of their presentation.
Thank you, John. Do I have
Other than that, I'll second the motion.
Thank you, John. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay, so being that the executive session has now moved to the end, I will ask Adam Barsky, EVP and Chief Financial Officer, to present the first item. Adam?
Thank you, Trustee Trainer. And good morning, trustees, NIPA staff, members of the public. This is to present the overview of the financial statements for ending December 31st of 2022. Next slide. Summary of our consolidated net income, actual versus prior year. As you can see, net income was 130 million versus a prior year of 72 million. Point out that EBITDA was significantly stronger at 627 versus 437. In terms of funds being generated that will factor into our coverage for our debt service and other fixed charges. Operating income also was 88 million greater in 2022 than 2021. The difference being between that net income are the non-operating revenue and expenses. Next page. In terms of overall balance sheet, while the size remains roughly the same, there were significant reductions in the liabilities and an overall improved cash position, which we'll go into in detail later. But overall, while our debt ratio is up somewhat, our debt service coverage ratio is significantly improved over 2021.
Adam, can you just remind me what our target is in terms of our debt service coverage ratio? Obviously, a big jump between 2021 and 22 and 20. What's the target that we try to stay within?
So there are two measures. It's the debt service coverage ratio and the fixed charge coverage ratio. From the board standpoint, the board has adopted a resolution as a minimum of 2.0 for debt service coverage, and that is used as a test before we make any releases for things like the canals, voluntary contributions, payments of monies into the monetized funds, etc. So obviously we're well above the 2.0 with respect to that. So the rating agencies look at both the debt service coverage as well as the fixed charge coverage, and the fixed charge coverage ratio we also target is 2.0, and we are well above that as well, and maintaining all of those targets. So we're
So
in
is
good
there a
shape
reason?
with
I guess what I'm trying to get at, because I suspected it was a lot lower than this. Is there a reason why we are where we are? What do you think is healthy for us as an organization? Where should we be? This obviously, we've got a very good cushion, but maybe there are other things that we can be doing with the cash. So your thoughts on whether or not you think this is where we need to stay based off of what we expect and how our how our assets and how things flow and timing of things for us.
Yeah, so I would say that for us, the more restrictive measure is the fixed charge coverage ratio, which is still in the twos, and below 2 would be below our target and more stressful. So while this is healthy, this is somewhat also based on improved cash flows, but also the restructuring we did in 2020, which also helped. But the fixed charge coverage ratio, as I mentioned, it's more restrictive on us vis-a-vis the rating agencies, and we want to stay comfortably ahead of above that 2.0. And given volatility of earnings and other things we have, we want to maintain a level that's comfortably above that 2.0 in order to maintain our AA rating, which we think is very important for the authority, as well as meet all of those capital commitments and needs that we have put into the plan. So I think with respect to this ratio, obviously we're very strong, but it's the fixed charge coverage ratio which is more restrictive on us.
And that's what guides you, that you pay more attention
Yes.
to that than the, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, but from the board perspective, as I mentioned, there's a resolution adopted that says, we must maintain at least the 2.0 on the debt service as well.
And just to follow up on Tracy's question, Adam. So, I know this is just a 2-year comparison. I don't know, down the line, you can take a look, but at what point are there flags, and at what level would there be something where we'd be concerned or that we'd have to start taking action, just in terms of a broad parameter for us to consider?
Yeah, and we'll show that later, but the fixed charge coverage ratio, if we started to get too close to 2 or start going, below the 2, that would be the flag that we would have to start making adjustments. Otherwise, it would raise concerns with the rating agencies.
Yep.
And, we could be potentially facing some, a downgrade or something of that nature. So that would be the first flag.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this slide? Next. Again, this is just some of the variances, and as we'll you'll hear later in the report from KPMG, the major change at the end of the year as far as the balance sheet goes. Next slide, please. Is through the adoption of the Gas B87, which is the new standard on leases. And what that requires is that when the pronouncement came out, over the years, there were various conditions that dictated whether something was an operating lease or a capital lease, and there was a test you'd have to go through to see if it met those requirements. The new Gas B87 basically says that anything that qualifies as a lease, or even broader than that, anything that demonstrates that you're controlling an asset for more than a year, could trigger the lease accounting, which would mean that the asset has to go on the balance sheet and recognize both the asset and the liability over the term of the commitments. We did not, as a result of implementing Gas B87, we did not have a lot of operating leases that had to be reclassified as a capital lease. I think the amount was very small, somewhere between $10 to $15 million, not material. However, we did have a capital lease on the books for $1 billion related to the AE2 contract that we had entered into on behalf of our CNE customers, which required us to book an asset of $1 billion on the assets and record $1 billion liability with a principal and interest amortization schedule. The guidance on 87 had an exclusion for certain types of PPAs that didn't represent or have an embedded lease within it. And based on that analysis, we were able to remove now AE2 off the balance sheet, and it'll be reflected as a as a power purchase agreement, and it will flow through as a basically a pass-through cost and revenue in terms of we would show the cost of the power purchases going through our purchases, and we would see the revenue coming back from our customers to offset it. NYPA doesn't make money or lose money on the transaction. We're basically a pass-through entity, and it'll show up in that way. So that was one of the major changes in the financial statements this year, as well as you recall, during the year we created the separately financed project bonds for our regulated rate transmission projects, our high priority projects, and those remain on balance sheet as a liability as well as the assets. But from a credit perspective, it's not counted against our general bond holders. There's a non-recourse to them. It's a separately project financed project. So all liabilities, all benefits and burdens are on those bondholders. NYPA owns all the assets, but as far as the revenues, the claim on the revenues is for the benefit of the bondholders of the SFP. And that required some changes in our financial statements to show the impact of that, but also in our notes, have that described for the benefit of those bondholders to see that we're meeting all the requirements and covenants around those bonds as part of this audit. So to me, those were the two major changes this year that were of material of significant importance. Any other questions? Next. Again, as we mentioned before, this is net cash provided by operating activities. I would say a significant improvement year over year. This has to do with we had a stronger year based on the increased energy prices, increased transmission revenues, increase of cash generated, and adding back non-cash items such as depreciation, things of that nature. So it shows a significant improvement year over the year. Next. And again, this is just to show that the impact of pre and post implementation of Gas B87, the net impact on a P&L basis is really none, but it does remove this obligation and the related assets from our balance sheet. What I would say on this is that, so when it comes to power purchase agreements, there will still be a charge, an imputed debt charge, as when we do calculate our fixed charge coverage ratio. And one thing I would say is that each of the rating agencies calculates this somewhat differently. So there isn't one standard as to how it's dealt with by all of them. So we have to look at it from a lot of different ways. But with respect to this particular item, one rating agency in particular doesn't count it in the fixed charge coverage ratio. They actually charge it against our debt service coverage ratio. So where you saw before, we were showing our debt service coverage ratio at 6 times or going up to 9 times. In this analysis with respect to that rating agency, they had charged this item against that debt service coverage. So when they published their reports, they were showing our debt service coverage ratio in the 2s, which again could be an issue if we were to ever go below that with respect to that rating agency. So having this removed will obviously increase significantly the metrics that they will be reporting out on us to our investors. So a lot of positive benefits of being able to do that this year with respect to the implementation of the new GASB pronouncement. Any questions? Next. That's it. So any other questions on that? And when we go into the full board meeting too, I presented in the materials a kind of a scorecard to look at not only year over year in a little more detail 21 to 22 on balance sheet. Chairman requested we have some more frequent discussions on balance sheet. We plan on doing that quarterly, but in terms of the year end, we'll talk about that in the full board, and as well take a look back from pre-pandemic to where we are today, what, based on the various actions we've taken and have spoken about over the last few years, what the improvements are to our balance sheet, our liquidity, and our financial strength to show the improvement based on all the actions we've taken over the last few years that you have been a part of and approved.
Just a quick question, not necessarily an audit issue, but more a finance issue. Do we track like cash conversion? Is that sort of a metric that we find important for our youth, and do you follow it?
I mean, it's not one of our major indicators, but because we do have a regular, a lot of our billing and our receivables, turn over very regularly. We'll talk about some of what we've done around the longer term receivables, but really our billing is very regular. Our conversion to cash is very quick and rapid and predictable. So it's not something that we today watch regularly or find that to be necessary.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I think, Adam, given the questions and the topics, and I appreciate you'll editorialize a bit in full board, but in light of where we find ourselves today in general, we're not a bank, but we got a securities portfolio. We operate in the same rising rate environment the rest of the world does. We've got a lot on our plate in terms of projects and initiatives, and even more is expected of us. For the lay person, knit all of that together in terms of your comfort level with how well positioned we are, or how positioned we are to navigate the path forward, and the confidence and comfort you have with where we find ourselves in what otherwise is a challenging and uncertain time.
Good question, Chairman. And what I would say to that is, again, that's one of the reasons we will go through it in the full board, but wanted to have that provide that look of pre-pandemic to where we are today. And I think it'll be very clear to everybody that we're in a significantly much stronger position today than we were as we headed into the pandemic. And again, we took many actions to improve our lines of credit with banks and counterparties, improving our cash position by reducing some of our longer term receivables and risky receivables. We'll show about how we had money lent out to the state, and that has been fully repaid. We had a lot of long-term receivables to various customers through our energy efficiency programs, and between refinancing and selling some of those obligations and reducing those receivables and converting that to cash, that was put us in a much stronger position. In terms of our securities portfolio, when we were in a zero or near zero rate environment, and certainly as we were at the beginning of the pandemic, it didn't seem that it was worth it for us to be invested in anything that had any kind of duration or that was a longer term investment. So we had liquidated essentially our portfolio, and we're in cash for a few years, or very short term investments for a few years to sort of weather all of that rate increase. We started to, as we saw rates starting to go up, and after a while we started to leg into some investments going forward to improve our interest earnings. We felt it was prudent at the time, but having liquidated at the time that we did, and not having that exposure when the rates went up, our unrealized loss would have been significantly higher than what we've actually seen. And I'm talking, almost, $50-100 billion. We'd had a negative mark on our securities portfolio. Ours was, in reality was around 10, which is on a $1 billion plus portfolio was actually pretty good. So I think that was, we made, I think, the right call at that time to do that. As I mentioned, we're sort of legging into getting, now that we're even in a short-term period, a 4% rate environment, it's prudent for us to make some investments and capture those higher interest rates over the next few years, especially as we see potentially rates coming down. So we think we're very well positioned. Our portfolio is high quality, all treasury agencies, and different than what you see in the banking crisis. We talked about this a little bit. In governmental accounting, we don't record our unrealized gains and losses into the balance sheet in the accumulated other comprehensive income as FASB entities that report, private entities, non-governmental entities are reporting. Our unrealized gains and losses run through our income statement on a monthly basis. So we see that every month, and it's almost as if it was realized. So again, we don't see that as an issue for us, and we are, I think, well positioned given the uncertainties that we're looking at today in terms of our ability to fund our capital program, meet all of our operating needs, and be able to have the patience to wait for markets to settle down or rates to normalize in terms of the next time we need to go into the market and borrow. So I think we're very well positioned as far as that goes.
And in fact, I remember as part of the planning process, back to the dialogue around coverage ratios and all the rest of that, we're consciously where we are, not circumstantially, to ensure we've got sufficient funding. You guys had shared with us some of your modeling out for the next several years in terms of cash flows and our ability to meet all those requirements. So while 2.0 is a threshold requirement, we've consciously positioned ourselves to be in an even stronger position, given what we've undertaken and plan to undertake over the next several years. Agree?
Yeah, I agree completely with that statement, Chairman, and also given the fact that we see costs rising and expenses, right, and we see due to inflation and other issues, increased wages based on new contracts, things of that nature. On the revenue side, we see a strong trend upward, but over the next several years with respect to the transmission revenues, which, not only from a policy standpoint is a keystone of our Vision 2030 to achieve policy goals, but from a financial standpoint, that growing transmission revenue, asset base and revenue base is a more steady and predictable stream of revenue. Our other biggest source of revenues comes from our hydro plants. Our customer revenues are some of those are capped based on tariff rates or based on cost of service rates. And then our merchant portfolio is where we have a significant amount of volatility and risk. And as you know, we do a lot to hedge that risk, but there's still nevertheless significant volatility there based on the size of our income statement and our plan that we need to achieve. And that's where we really need to have that flexibility or that cushion built in, because you never know when there's going to be a steep decrease in energy prices, as we're seeing, even from last September to January, and we need to be positioned to be able to buffer that and weather those storms as they come. So it's what you were stating was entirely correct, that we need to be able to weather that kind of volatility when it happens.
Okay, just trying to make sure, big picture for the public in particular, there's a context that we find ourselves consciously in a strong and very positive position and confident, even in the face of challenging times, that we're in a good spot in terms of our ability to push forward and navigate what comes at us and what we're otherwise choosing to tackle.
Yes, and just to restate again, also what we said when we presented the budget, we've improved our cash position and our earnings power, looking out into the future, but it's not as if we are sitting on some pile of cash saying, well, what are we going to do with it, right? We've committed that to a well thought out capital plan that is aligned with Vision 2030 strategy. Significant major projects, top 20 projects make up 90% of that plan. So that cash going forward is fully committed to achieving those goals. And big projects like, our life extension modernization of our hydro plants of 1.1 billion, next gen Niagara, our major transmission projects like Smart Path Connect, Central East Energy Connect, all of those projects are very capital intensive, require lots of money, both on an equity basis and on a debt basis. And that's why, we're positioning our financial plan in the way that we are, so that we can actually achieve the outcomes related to those big rock projects that we have identified as part of the strategy.
All right, thanks for the recap context. Sorry, Dennis.
That's fine. Any other questions for Adam? Seeing no other questions, I will now ask for a motion that the Audit Committee approve the NYPA Consolidated Year-End 2022 Financial Report.
So moved. B. Gonzalez.
There a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. I'll now ask Scott Heiser, partner of KPMG, to present his update.
Scott, are you muted?
So, can't hear you.
We got you muted, or are you muted?
My screen.
Hello.
We may have muted him. We should check.
We didn't mute him. He muted
Okay.
himself, I think, because there's some background noise that he's working through.
Can you hear?
Chris, we can hear you.
He's gonna fail my computer.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Got an echo.
3 times we could hear you. Wonders of technology.
Am I on mute? Or no? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sounds improved.
John, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay,
I
sorry.
hear you.
I don't know. The echo was my computer, but when I talk into it, it didn't work. So I apologize. So, but yeah, so briefly, good morning, everyone. Sorry about the glitch. With me today is Chris DeVenzo, who's been our manager the last 4 years. And like I said, he's the one that does all the heavy lifting with our team, but he'll go through some of the highlights, but just a high level. This year, again, I think we've continued to move the ball like I talked about from 19 to 22 from a cooperation and getting stuff done ahead of time. So I think that's been good in terms of Sundeep and Adam and his team and some of the additions they've had. At this point, we're substantially complete. barring something unusual, don't anticipate, finalizing our report next week in line with the timeline. Realistically, the two, and I won't repeat everything Adam said, the two biggest things that were kind of outside I'll say the normal, audit stuff was really the AE2 evaluation. As Adam said, that there was a lot of dialogue with management, legal. We probably had at least a dozen phone calls with our national office, working through that and the evaluation under the new standard with the amendments to the agreement to get comfortable ultimately with that conclusion. So there was a lot of work on both management, our side on that front, and then comfortable with that ultimate conclusion. And then obviously there's some work around just the overall 87 adoption, but the AE2 component was by far the lion's share of the effort on that front. And then again, as Adam alluded to, the new financing, which created some additional disclosure and effort around that SFP, which I think you will see in the disclosures. There's more or less like I'll call it a condensed financial information that from the underlying projects which are included. So those were the two, I would say, where we went probably outside of the normal scope, where we spent some time this year, and obviously comfortable with where management landed and the disclosures related to those two items. So they're probably the two big things. And then obviously I think just not to goes without saying, I think John, you mentioned with all the craziness in the market the last couple weeks with the banks. I know we've obviously had some discussions with Sundeep and Adam, and fortunately, there's not much of any exposure to the company has directly to those institutions, which is a good thing. So we've obviously had some discussions on that with management recently. And then probably the other thing more looking forward, I know we're already kind of working with Adam and his team on some of with the Clean Path and Connect All and some of the things they're coming down the pike. We've already kind of started some dialogue with that. So as those come to fruition, and some of the accounting considerations and so forth, they were kind of on top of that as real time as possible as those things come into play here for NIPA. So overall, I think we're at a good spot. I'm happy. I think we've continued, like I said, where we're at is I feel is much better. Like the audit process is much improved from when I'll say we were 4 years ago. So I think we've continued to work collaboratively with Sundeep and on each side try to improve that, a few steps every year. And so I think we'll do that again this year. It's not perfect yet, but obviously I think we're definitely better than what we were a few years back. So I'll pause if there's any broad questions of the committee, and if not, I'll turn it to Chris and he'll kind of just highlight some of the slides.
Yeah, just a broad question. Are you physically, how much more are you in on location at any of our sites this year compared to last year or the last couple of years? And what's your target in terms of actually, or do you do it at all, sitting down physically and getting into the offices and meeting with our team?
This year I was compared to 20 and 21, which was I think 0 except for the board meeting. We had a couple meetings on site this year at my level. The staff is still primarily remote, and I think it's somewhat driven. I know we try to mirror the client schedule. I know they're kind of I'll say I think it's a couple days a week on site. So we've still primarily been remote this year, Tracy, but there's I'll say been an uptick. There's about a slight uptick this year up compared to say the last 2 years, where obviously it was 100% remote. And personally, I'd like it to be more. So and I think my goal would be to continue to keep that up, because I just think it's better for our people. It's better for the relationship. It's better for just the product to do that. But it still was primarily remote. But we did probably have a little bit uptick of more on-site presence than we did the last 2 years.
Yeah, there's a difference in the texture of what you can do when you're interacting with people and just walking around in the halls. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we're still walking the line of trying to balance, not until the labor market, like I said, loosens a little bit. We're also trying to balance appeasing, for lack of a better word, some of our younger folks that in their expectations. So it's a little bit of a balancing beam on our part as well.
Thank you.
You wanna-
Okay, so like Scott mentioned, I'm going to walk us through some of the slides. So if you jump ahead to the next slide after this one. So this slide summarizes some of the technology tools available. The engagement team over the years has continued to seek new opportunities and increase our use of technology for efficiencies in the audit. Just to give a few examples of things we've done, we use a tool, the Journal Entry Insights, to take a look at the total population of journal entries throughout the year. We use this in our assessment of management override of controls, identifying high-risk criteria in journal entries that we want to take a deeper look at, and overall just making sure that all journal entries were posted from a completeness standpoint. We also use various tools. There's a matching routine, which matches data sets between one another, which helps in both performing the work and performing risk assessment, in identifying risk of material misstatement. Moving to the next slide. Some of this is just highlights of what Scott mentioned. So outstanding matters are just completing some of the last few open items, including the reviews that are required, and then management's representation letter, legal confirmations, and the in-house legal letter. And then here we have listed our deliverables, which are consistent with prior years in the auditor's report, the Yellow Book opinion, and the investment compliance report.
So nothing remains, Chris, that we should feel there's would translate to exposure at this point. This is just tying it up and putting it in a bow and issuing reports, as opposed to any work that's yet pending, or we should believe you have to focus on.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a few outstanding items. I don't think anything has come to our attention that is of concern that poses a material risk at this point. Obviously, as we tie some of the remaining items down, if anything comes to our attention, we'll obviously make you guys aware. But at this point, there's nothing to my knowledge that would expose a material error in the financials or anything like that.
Okay.
Moving to the next slide, just some summary of the results. So like I mentioned, nothing to my knowledge at this point of any issues. So that's kind of summarized here with no matters to report. If you jump to the next slide, here is just an assessment of our inquiries of illegal acts and fraud, nothing identified there. And then our written communications include the engagement letter, management representation letter, and a summary of uncorrected misstatements, which will be provided under separate cover in the letter to the audit committee. This slide here is just a reminder of internal controls. Again, we don't opine on controls. However, we do consider it in our performance of the audit. And here outlines just a summary of what a material weakness and a significant deficiency is. So again, things that we consider through the performance, but not expressing an opinion on. Moving to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the risk of management override of controls, that is the significant risk that we have identified on the audit. And this is a significant risk that's present at all entities. So it's a significant risk in all the audits we perform. So our response to that is related to journal entries and using some of the technology we have available to sift through 100% of the population, identify things that we deem high risk, and validate a further response from the team. And there are no matters to report to date on our work over management override of controls. The next few slides are pretty consistent with last year in regards to the significant accounting estimates used in the preparation of the financial statements. So I'll give a few highlights here, but again, no major changes from the prior year. So the other post-retirement benefit, the OPEB plan under Gas B87, management uses a third-party actuary, Buck, to value the OPEB plan. And likewise, KPMG engages a valuation specialist to perform an independent review of those, of the valuation, including the key assumptions and data used in that valuation. Moving to the next slide. The next slide highlights the.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Educate me. So this says the actuarial evaluation is done as the middle of June. Obviously, the rate environment, middle of June, very different than where we find ourselves at year end. While it's a longer term view, is there any kind of refresh or update that you do? Help me understand how you guys look at the world, given a very meaningful change, at least in that environment over the back half of the year.
Yeah, I can say, and Scott could add if he wants. We definitely considered that and spoke to our actuary about that, because that's obviously something that, to your point, was definitely evolving throughout the year. Because of the long-term nature of the plan, there wasn't any concern on our actuaries' standpoint from, rates and how that would impact the valuation, again, considering the long-term nature of the obligation. So definitely something we considered, but not something we deemed to have a material impact on where the valuation of the plan is.
To your point, John, ultimately, it's as of 6/30, which is the date. So to your point, there obviously are going to be, if there would be a difference if 12/31 was the date, to your point, but nothing, but to Chris's point, our actuary didn't have any concern with it overall.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, so next slide here is the pension plan under GASB 68. So the unique thing here is that NIPA is participating in the state plan. So primarily all of the valuation is driven by the valuation done at the state. And the NIPA pretty much just records their proportional share of that plan. It is something we have our actuary look at and kick the tires on to make sure there's nothing that pops out there of concern there. And based on his review, everything was consistent with his understanding and his expectations. Moving to the next slide, the significant accounting estimate valuation of marketable securities. So again, it's similar to prior years. We perform a assessment of the valuation of investments using our KPMG National Pricing Desk. And we also sample some of those investments to determine compliance with board-approved investment policies. Nothing of note here that has come to our attention. And then the last significant accounting estimate I'll highlight is the next slide, which is the valuation of derivatives. So KPMG has looked at the fair value of open positions at the end of the period, contracts with counterparties. Nothing has come to our attention. We do engage a derivative valuation expert to price out an independent fair value expectation, and everything came back in line with what NIPA has recorded at the end of the year. So no matters to note there. And then quickly moving through just some of the other significant audit areas that aren't estimates themselves. Long-term debt, we confirm all long-term debt obligations. We look at any issuances, repayments, and we perform a recalculation of interest expense for the period. Moving to the next slide. Capital assets and adoption of Gas B87. So we perform test work over the capital activity during the period, including construction work in progress, and plant service additions. And we look for any stale projects sitting in CWIP that would potentially need to be moved and begin starting to depreciate, and do an analytical procedure over depreciation expense. And then for the adoption of Gas B87, we assessed AE2 to determine if it met the lease criteria, and as noted before, did not meet the criteria of a lease at the end of the period, so therefore was off the balance sheet there. Moving to the next slide, revenue. So here we confirm accounts receivable with third parties. We perform detailed testing of the various revenue streams such as CNI and wholesale, NISO sales, UCAP revenues, and we look at both price and volume in performance of those procedures. And nothing to note through our performance of revenue test work. Moving to the next slide. This is just a summary of newly effective accounting standards. So obviously Gas B87 is listed here, which was adopted this period. And just some forward-looking accounting standards listed here. I don't think at any point or at this point anything's expected to have a material impact, but that's currently being assessed by management and KPMG as well. Moving to the next slide, here's some reminders on independence. And then I'll just note as of today, KPMG has nothing to report on independence. We are independent as of today's date. Moving to the next slide. This is the standard inquiry slide you guys have seen before. So just a reminder here. And I believe that is it. So happy to take any questions if there are any at this point.
Anyone have any questions for Scott or Chris?
I'm good for now, Dennis. Could chat a little bit further in exec session, but I'm good. Thanks very much, guys.
Very good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. No vote was required on this update. I'm going to now ask Angela Gonzalez, Senior Vice President, Internal Audit, to present her update in the next two items. Angela?
Good morning, trustees, EMC, NIPA colleagues, and public. I'd like to take you through our update on our 2022 internal audit plan for NIPA and canals, and then afterwards present to you the 2023 internal audit plan, as well as the 2023 EH&S compliance audit plan. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is our internal audit scorecard. The top half is our internal audit metrics. The bottom half of our metrics related to observations. At this point, we are at 98% complete. We have one more report that has to be issued. That will be issued today. So we'll be closing out 2022 later on today. In terms of our operational excellence metrics, our audit deliverables with opinions, we are at 68%, and this targeted 50% will be evaluated and revised for our 2023 scorecard. In terms of fieldwork to report issuance, we are below the benchmark, and then the average project life cycle of an audit takes us about 10.6 weeks, which is a lot below the benchmark as well. I added in just for your informational purposes, I report this out to you once a year on where we are in terms of staff excellence. So our staff right now, they have at least one person has one certification. That's about 75% of our staff. And on the average, our internal audit experience is about 17 years. So we're a pretty well-rounded group. And then in terms of departmental utilization, we reached 80%. The remaining percentage of our time is allocated between GRC, data analytics, training, and administrative time. There are no questions there. I'll go right to the bottom here on observations. So we do track percentage of high-risk observations. So to date, we have 8 observations that we identified as high, as opposed to 2021 where we had 19. So we did decrease the number of high risk observations, which is an indicator of the control environment. And then the middle bar here is the percentage of high risk observations and how they were implemented. So for 2021, we do have one that is still open. I will talk a little bit more in detail about that in a future slide. And then 3 out of the 8 that we found have closed already. And the middle bar, the last bar here is all our observations, high, medium, and low. In addition to the one high we have for 2021, there is a medium and a low that will be closing. So there's 95 out of the 98 that have closed, and to date, 40 out of the 77 have closed for 2022. So to the right here, this bar chart is just a pattern of how our high observations have closed. So if you see between in 2021, 16 have closed ahead of time or on time, 2 were extended and 1 is open. For 2022, 3 have closed ahead of time and 5 are open. Any questions on this? If not, we can go to the next slide.
Angela, just a quick question for me. I'm just trying to figure out how to read the bottom left part of the chart, the observations I identified.
Mhm.
If this is progress in terms of the organization understanding sort of their risk environment and therefore taking out that risk or mitigating that risk so that you don't observe. How do I take that? What does that represent? The decrease, is that ultimately the goal? And then what does it signify as the numbers are decreasing year over year?
It does signify that the control environment is steadily making progress. It also signifies management's attention to closing observations that we identify and the mechanisms that have been put in place, specifically related to the internal business controls group. There's a lot of collaboration between internal audit and that group with monthly reporting and what is open. They work hand in hand with management on helping them with remediation. They are also involved in control engagements with them. I would also say the other mechanism that's in place now is a monthly readout from me to the ERMC on any high observations, and then as well as continued EMC reporting on all observations. So I think there's a threefold type of mechanisms that are in place to for the control environment to improve.
Thank you.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So for the 2022 status, our plan turned out with 42 projects. We have delivered 44 deliverables. From those 42 projects, 45 will be delivered in total, since 3 engagements had more than 1 report. I also have on the bar charts below, the pie charts below here, the percentages of opinions that we did identify. So we had 16% were satisfactory, 30% were some improvement needed, 23% considerable improvement needed, and 31% not rated. 8 of the observations were associated with the 10 considerable improvement needed reports, as opposed to the 19 observations we identified in 2021, associated with 10 considerable improvement needed reports in that year. As I mentioned before, management is continuing to elevate the control environment. We're making steady progress there, and we'll continue to move in that fashion.
But editorialize a bit, Angela. So should we feel good that only 16% of the total population, which is, I don't know, 25% of that which you opined, is satisfactory opinion? 75% of those where you rendered an opinion are either some improvement or considerable improvement. I mean, help us, give me some context there. Is that the good news or the bad news?
I would say that I would capitalize that as making significant improvement over the years. So we'll continue to do that. We still are finding considerable improvement needed opinions, because, well, I'll give you a feel for some of our top themes that I know do report to you at the end of the year once I'm done with the whole audit year. For the first time in several years, the policies and procedures has not been an issue. It didn't need to make the top 3. But we are still finding areas where, limited management oversight and control design deficiencies. We're still finding some areas in that, and I believe that's to me the natural progression of, okay, we've looked at all the policy and procedures now. Now it's time to take a deeper look into our control design. I think there's some more work to be done related to monitoring, control, execution, and governance. So that's why we're still seeing that, but I don't think there's anything that's seriously concerning, that considering the management attention that's being given to this.
So when you said we've made considerable improvement over the last few years, that's directional or quantitative? I mean, I don't remember what these numbers were 2-3 years ago, but is it the shape of the pie looks different, or are you just saying the overall perspective on control environment and collective management focus? Define what's considerably improved, your words.
I would say definitely attention to policies and procedures and how they affect the business. That is considerably, that's improved significantly. But I still think that there's still areas of where governance needs to be looked at, frameworks need to be looked at, in terms of, control design related to that, monitoring controls. That's where we need to focus on. So compared to where 5 years ago, I think we've made significant improvement. But then we still have more work. But like I said, there's nothing significant nothing really significant that we have to be concerned about, considering the attention that is being given to the issues that we're identifying through our audits.
All right, well, I just want to ensure that with 23% of 70%, which is the pool that you rated, so I'll say a third of the better part of a third of the pool has considerable improvement needed. I'm just trying to ensure there aren't red flags staring us in the face that we need to be paying more attention to, or frankly, the team, Justin and the organization needs to be more responsive to. I saw Adam's recap there, which portrays a very positive trend. I'm just making sure you agree that we're in a okay place, trending in a better direction, but there's no significant downside risk or exposure in your 23%, which is, I'm saying, more like 30% or a third of the overall population.
I agree with Adam's assessment. I don't believe there's any real concern, no red flags that we're seeing, but just, we're making steady progress, and we need to continue to make that steady progress if we're going to, move the needle and see less considerable improvement needed opinions going forward. So I think we should just continue on the trajectory that we've been working towards. And we'll see, progress over time. But then we also have to take into account, sometimes, through our plan, we're also looking at different and new areas. We're doing deeper scopes, looking at higher risk. We were bound to come up with some considerable improvement needed, but overall, the attention to the issues has been definitely heightened. So I agree with
frankly,
that.
I don't want to extend the discussion, but I don't accept that we're bound to find areas of considerable improvement, because that implies that risk oversight, risk management isn't a priority as we start down new initiatives or take on new opportunities. Clearly, risk management should be paramount as we initiate any new activity, so that, frankly, I wouldn't want you to conclude, well, we're bound to find problems because it's a new area. I would hope as we get into new initiatives and new areas, we learn from past experience, and we're better positioned as we start down this path. So we can come back to it, but I think you get
I may have used the wrong
drift
word.
here. That
Down, but
I'm
we
always
may.
worried about downside exposure, and this just gives me pause in terms of the amount or quantity of it, but I'll circle back with Justin later and we can pick it up. Let's keep
But I would
moving.
like to
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, but I'd like to extend it just a little bit, because the sense that I want to get, Angela, is understanding from your perspective whether or not you see the organization maturing in terms of how they see the control environment. And so, while, there likely will always be some considerable improvement, I agree as we move into new areas and, we're all are human, but what I want to get from you, what would be helpful for me at least, is to understand whether or not you are seeing an increased appreciation of the importance of having controls in place throughout the enterprise, if you're seeing that improve over the years. Because I don't have the ability to compare this to previous years, the 23% of that, what that looks like pre-pandemic or whatever. You're seeing the progression and the maturity of the control environment throughout the enterprise is what I was trying to get a sense of.
And we are seeing more attention to controls over the years. We're definitely seeing progress in that space. And I definitely see room, always room for improvement. The control environment to me is a dynamic thing. It changes all the time depending on your business processes and the risks that you have to address. But overall, we are seeing the control environment improve over the last few years. And I think that really has to do with management's attention to remediation and executing on the observations that we've been identifying.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can go, any other questions? If not, we can go to the next slide. This is our status on our environmental health and safety plan. So we had 4 audits that were part of this plan. 4 have been issued. There was some improvement needed, opinions for the 4 of them. There are definitely, in our reports, we do note notable practices that management is doing effectively. But any observations that we did identify did not have any violations of external laws or regulations, or had any substantial risks to the environment, health and safety, employees, customers, or the public. So if we can go to the next slide. This is our 2022 observation status for Knife and Canals. So as I mentioned before, 77 observations, 40 have been closed, 52%, 37 are open. The bar charts below here demonstrate how they have closed, the pattern of how they've closed. So 47% to date have been closed ahead of time or on time with minimal observation extensions. And then any observations that are due are on track to close within the due date. No observations are overdue at this point. If we can go to the next slide. This is the 2021 status, 98 observations, 95 have been closed. There's, I mentioned before, 1 medium, 1 high, and 1 low that are open. So to date, 79% of the 2021 have been closed ahead of time or on time. 18% were extended, but however, they were closed on time. 3 are open, as I mentioned, and they are tracking to close to their due date. And if you go to the next slide, I have a little more detail on the highs, and 1 high and 1 medium. I know we reported these 2 at the December meeting. This is just an update to the status on these. So for fixed assets, it's a medium rated observation. It was extended to June. This has to do with the accounting team needing additional time to configure SAP for the new depreciation rates that were approved by FERC in October of 2022. They're going to a group depreciation methodology. And that is taking significant amount of time to configure SAP to accommodate this. So they're extended out to June. In terms of the 1 high that's left, it's related to the Canals post-integration review. This is the phase 2 of it. Management is working with consultants to put in a shared service model, and the components behind it related to policies and procedures, communication protocols, and metrics. Internal business controls is working closely with management on this as well. And they're tracking to June for this item. internal audit will do a follow-up. Once the integration has advanced and is baked in more into the organization, we'll come back and do a follow-up review. Okay, 2020, so this is the environmental health and safety observations. We identified 37 altogether. 19 have been closed and 18 observations are open. 51% closed ahead of time or on time, and we have no extensions, and all observations that are open are on track to close within their due dates. Go to the next slide. And then from 2021, we do have one that I reported back in December. This is related to Zeltman power plant. This is related to the fire suppression system there, changing out the foam. Management has submitted an application to the FDNY, working with an expediter to get that application approved. And once that is approved, it'll be installed and commissioned. They're targeting the end of June to have this completed. That's it for. You go to the next slide. Now, I would like to talk to you about our 2023 plan. So our 2023 plan, the proposed plan is fully developed and reflects the components below. It was a defined and risk scored audit universe aligned by business unit. There are 49 audit entities in the universe, and audit project selection is based on audit risk ranking, last audit year, internal audit resources. We do involve key stakeholders to provide their input from EMC, risk management, and various business units across the organization. 93% of our plan is aligned to NIPA and the canal's strategic priorities, pillars, and top enterprise risks. And then as emerging risks happen and changing businesses come across our way, we do look at our plan quarterly to ensure that the plan still makes sense for what we're looking at, and that we adjust accordingly. Internal audit will be requesting that the audit committee approve the plan and future slide. So we can go to the next slide. This is our risk assessment process that we follow every year, and these are the key components of it. We do look at internal inputs. So we look at 2022 plan results, deferred audits last year, the last audit year. I mentioned we interviewed about 81 individuals throughout the organization to obtain information. We do look at external inputs, Gartner's 2023 hotspots. We benchmark ourselves against our peers and look at industry benchmarks as well. Then we look at our audit universe. So to date, we have 49 entities, which are risk scored based on our model. And then the plan has 39 NIPA and 3 Canal Corporation audits. And then it gets presented to the EMC for their review, and before it becomes to the audit committee for approval. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the breakdown of our audit universe. So as I said, the audit entities, 49 that we have today, we did adjust for department names or new audit entities that have been developed, and any organizational restructuring. So each audit entity is risk assessed using our model. To the right is the breakdown of the high, medium, and low entities. So in terms of our audit entity cycle, audit projects in each year's plan we focus on high and medium rated audit entities, and the audit coverage 5 years is over a 5-year cycle. And to the right is the table of what that cycle looks like. And then in terms of the audit entity coverage, so we have audited every high rated audit entity and 87% of the medium rated audit entities. Anything that has not been audited from a medium rated audit entity is either on our plan, or other higher priority medium rated audit entities took precedence. And then we continue to audit the low rated entities based on benchmark and as needed. If there are no questions here, we can go to the next slide. So this is our audit plan coverage. We do have 42 projects on the 2023 plan. 86% of them are audits, 9% are assessments, and 5% are advisory engagements. So the plan is based on two main things: internal audit staff hours for the audit plan and our third-party co-source hours. They supplement our internal staff hours, and then the average budgeted hours for audit projects. In 2022, our average was about 525. This year, the actual hours came out a little less, to 500. But we increased the average audit project to 550. So we're doing more and more data analytics, and that requires a little more time to pull data, analyze it, and provide some valuable insights from it. Our total audit plan hours are 22,725, and there's more detail on the next slide on that. Internal staff hours came out to 15,525, with 7,200 hours will go to our third-party co-source. So approximately 850 hours are contingency hours for special projects that we do get asked throughout the year. We get about 2 a year on the average. So we have an allotment for that. So if we can go to the next slide. Here is our breakdown of internal audit hours, third-party co-source hours between business technology, between business and technology audits. So internal audit staff hours are based on a staff level of 18. Third-party co-source technology hours and for audit projects are related to IT and some integrated audits. We had to add an additional 3,000 hours for business audits, and they'll be supplemented by co-source. The third-party co-source hours increased for business audits due to labor market conditions, leading to some staffing shortages. Internal audits model has been repositioned to include dedicated third-party resources for both technology and business. Historically, we've only had dedicated resource for technology audits. And then this bar chart below here is just the breakdown of how the types of audits between business, technology, and integrated. Business audits increased slightly due to certain business operations that we have not audited or have not recently audited in commercial operations, and to cover audits that we have to cover to meet the ISO 55001 standards in utility operations. Technology audits decreased slightly due to audit coverage that we've had completed in 2022, and we just had a slight increase in integrated due to coverage for organization-wide digitalization implementation projects that we are participating in.
Angela, just a quick question on the third-party co-source hours. And I wasn't on the committee last year, so I don't have a sense of whether or not this is going down year over year. Especially, and tell me if I'm not reading this correctly, if we're talking about sort of technology as we become, as we position ourselves to be a digital utility, technology is always going to be something that's important. So why would we don't have the people internal to be able to do this and to be this reliant? I mean, I'm just comparing the internal staff hours to the planned third-party co-source hours. It seems kind of high, but you'll tell me if that's an accurate read. And is it just, that we will continue to always outsource these particular areas, or you plan on hiring and bringing in sort of a technology audit person in the future to replace this more permanently?
Historically, we have always had co-source to supplement our technology audits. One for expertise, and then just to supplement staffing levels. I do have a dedicated technology internal team, but because of the labor market situation, we did lose a good amount of internal auditors this last year. And so now we are dedicating co-source hours to the business side. Historically, we haven't had to do that. So
okay, that's helpful to know, because I would think that because we are becoming so much more reliant on technology and as a digital utility, that these are key positions that we want to have in-house so that we hold on to that knowledge as opposed to relying on third parties. But I understand if there's been dynamics over the last year where we've lost people, and this is a very competitive market, as I know very well. So Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, we have had a running discussion, Tracy, over the last few years on how to balance the in-house outsourced talents and skills that we need. And as Angela said, we've opted to really outsource. That's a particular point. I hear you in terms of our evolution as an organization, but frankly, I think that much more reliant on external expertise. So I'd love to have it in-house. We just haven't been able to effectively, compete for or retain relevant talent. So we've compensated by looking to Deloitte to, bring us the expertise that we otherwise need. So it's been a conscious decision. Not perfect world, but one that we think leaves us or puts us in a good spot, or the best possible spot given the circumstances. Not a new phenomenon.
Okay. We can go to the next slide. So this is our audit risk category allocation. We do a comparison between 2023 and 2022. Between the risk categories for financial, legal, regulatory, operational, strategic, and technology. So the allocation of our risk categories has not materially changed from the 2022 allocation. We do take into consideration the Vision 2030 priorities, pillars, top enterprise risk, and external industry top enterprise risk. We do see an increase in audit coverage for operational risk due to the supporting the Vision 2030 priorities and pillars and the top enterprise risk. Operational risk has the most audit coverage. Actually, that is in benchmark. I did do some research on this, and many internal audit functions do, as part of their audit plan, operational risk happens to be the biggest part of their audit plan. So financial risk coverage decreased somewhat since we've had covered some audits in that area in recent prior years. Strategic risk virtually remain the same, as well as technology risk, supporting the digitalization foundation pillar, and then regulatory and compliance risk as well. So for canals, we did see an increase in financial risk audit coverage since there are some areas we have not audited in the past, and we will be taking a look at them in 2023. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This is our alignment. As I mentioned before, 93% of the projects have been tied to a strategic priority pillar or a top enterprise risk. This is the list of projects that align with these pillars and priorities. We do have a concentration somewhat in customer and state, digitalization, hydropower, and enterprise, but we try to cover all of the risks as much as possible when we do our audit planning. We can go to the next slide. The next slide is just our alignment to the top enterprise risks. We do have a concentration here in critical infrastructure, customer energy choices, cybersecurity, and third-party risk, and then ESG. Next, if you can go to the next slide. I do want to talk a little bit about our strategic initiatives for 2023 and through 2024. So in 2019, I presented a 3-year strategy, and we basically operationalized that strategy. And the components of that strategy were agile audit, GRC, automation, data analytics, and then talent management. So it was time to do a refresh of our strategy to take the function where internal audit, the profession is moving towards, to keep us relevant, and also to be in alignment with the changing business landscape. So we held a strategy session and had to define how internal audit could better align with NYPA's Vision 2030. And this is a depiction of that session. So the top box here we're seeing is Vision 2030. Our purpose, we're redefining our purpose. That will be, which is to support NYPA's Vision 2030 by identifying challenges and opportunities, providing solutions to continue advancing NYPA's towards successful outcomes. And the 3 components of the strategy are organizational trust, ESG, and data analytics. So we can go to the next slide. So I just want to give you some information on trust. So why, three components here. Why does trust matter? Why internal audit? And then the value we provide. So to the right here, why does trust matter? These are just some statistics around trust. So it affects financial performance. So a trustworthy company outperforms their competitors by 4 times. Workforce affects workforce management. 79% of our employees that who highly trust their employer feel motivated to work. And then brand protection, organizations that are affected by a negative event, their value falls between 26 to 74% against their peers. So why is internal audit? Why involve internal audit with this? So as trusted advisors to the organization, we are uniquely positioned to drive and measure trust awareness across NYPA. Internal audit can provide an independent and transparent objective observations and recommendations related to this. And then we also work very closely with the business. You know, we usually look at looking at risk sometimes from bottom up, but looking at trust from across the organization gives us the opportunity to look at things from a top-down perspective and give us some risk sensing capability. The value we provide, an independent assessment, we can provide a comprehensive view of how trust is perceived across the organization and any gaps that we have. We can compare our performance to sector industry benchmarks to understand where NYPA falls. And then we'll quantify this, this trust organizational, there are trust organizational domains that we'll look at using a trust assessment tool. And the information from this tool will come into our risk assessment process. We can go to the next slide. So ESG, I know ESG is, you know, very important to organizations these days, and we felt it was important for us to have this as part of our strategy. So why ESG, and then why internal audit, and the value we provide. So regulators, there's rulemaking, you know, taking shape around climate-related issues and other ESG disclosures, particularly diversity and inclusion, and then in terms of transparency, a request for transparency on financial impacts related to climate-related issues and other ESG items. So why internal audit to do this? So data, we can provide data-driven insights via through analytics and identify processes and controls that don't align to our ESG commitment. We can also provide future-focused engagements related to ESG. And then the value we'll provide is driving forward NYPA's vision ESG pillar, as well as having access to subject matter specialists to provide us insights and leading practices. Then on the data analytics side, we'll continue to innovate our audits using our tools and to provide valuable insights through our execution of audits. We will continue to improve our collaboration with stakeholders across the organization, as well as mature our data analytics skill sets within internal audit. If we could go to the next slide, there's no questions. This is, I don't know how much you want to go into detail related to what our roadmap is here, but we will start having, we're going to define and purpose and refresh our brand. We will have a trust overview session with our internal audit staff so they can understand what it is. Update and revise our purpose statement, which you just saw, and we'll communicate that to our stakeholders throughout the organization. We will demo this trust assessment tool with the EMC. There are 18 domains that are part of this trust assessment tool, and then we will review the results.
So the trust assessment tool, Angela, is that a survey? What are we doing there?
I think it's a series of 18 domains and then questions within the domains. Yeah, I believe it's an assessment. It's a survey tool, but you get data out of it to see where we fall in terms of trust across these 18 domains. Well, then based on the results of these, we'll debrief the EMC on the results, and then we'll work with key stakeholders to prioritize which trust domains we need to focus on. We'll update our risk assessment interview. We have an interview template that we use for interviews during our risk assessment process. We'll update that to include the trust domains, as well as incorporate the results in our risk assessment process to create the plan, and then update the plan to include the trust domains. If we could go to the next slide. This is the ESG roadmap. So we will be meeting with our key stakeholders to get a better understanding of our ESG metrics. We have done some work around integrated reporting. So we have we know how many we have. We've looked at a sample of some of these metrics. We want to get a better understanding of the rest of them. And we'll look at some recent legislation related to ESG. So we will be updating our interview template to include ESG elements, as well as mapping our plan to the capitals that we have designated for NYPA. We want to upscale our staff here because we do want to have some training on ESG for our staff so they understand what is expected when we are looking at ESG, as well as socialize and communicate this to what the role of ESG is for internal audit, and then execute ESG audits as well, and continue to help management identify any risk related to ESG. Then we can go to the last slide is just a continuation of our data analytics roadmap from 2022. We will provide a resource plan related to the data analytics strategy. We want to enhance our methodology. We have a DA methodology. We need to integrate it better into our audit, agile audit methodology. We are working on a data analytics platform right now. We're working closely with IT on that. That'll provide us the opportunity to pull data down quicker, save the data routines that we do create. And we want to improve our partnership with data analytics organizations throughout NYPA. We'll continue to increase our skill set related to data analytics and develop a training program for that. We also have to work on a data analytics life cycle management. That gives us the opportunity to manage the life cycle of the data analytics that we do create, how often we'll run them, when we have to enhance them, and then continue work on continuous auditing and monitoring. We've developed a few continuous auditing routines, which we're working with the business and running for them periodically. And the goal is to eventually hand off a continuous monitor these routines to the business so they can run them themselves if they choose. And that gets us to continuous monitoring. There are no any questions?
I have a question. It's an integration question, and it's the fact that canals doesn't appear here where you say NYPA. So does that mean it does not include canals?
Oh no, it includes canals.
Okay.
Now we provide analytics to. Are you talking specifically to canal about data analytics, or just the all?
Just in general, as I'm looking at this, to me, it's important that we always do the hyphen.
Absolutely. Okay. Point taken. I think there's one more slide.
Yes.
So the internal audit is requesting that the audit committee approve the 2023 NYPA and Canal Corporation audit plan.
So with that, I'll ask for a motion that the audit committee approve the 2023 NYPA and Canal internal audit.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Angela, you're up again.
Yes, I am. We have one last item to get through. Go to the next slide. So this is the environmental health and safety compliance audit plan. Basically, this is the same process that we use for our NYPA and Canal audit plan. I won't go into the details that you've seen this before. The only thing that is different here is that the number of entities are less. There are 8, and that the plan maps to the ESG pillar and the workforce health and safety top enterprise risks. So we can go to the next slide. This is our annual audit planning and risk assessment process. It basically mirrors pretty much the NYPA and Canal's risk assessment process. I don't have to go into details here. The only thing that is slightly different is that we do consult with a third-party consultant that we use to do these audits, and then we have a subcommittee that reviews the audit plan before it goes to the audit committee. And that subcommittee includes the EH&S department, the law department, ethics and compliance, as well as utility operations. So if we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the EH&S audit universe has 8 entities. They are categorized by type and size of the facility, as well as construction projects that are at those facilities. Each audit entity is risk assessed using our internal audit risk model. As you see to the right here is the table of the high, medium, and low rated entities. Audit projects are included now related to the audit universe. Audit projects and each year's plan focus on high, medium, and low rated audit entities over a 6-year cycle. And we use a 6-year cycle, so it allows validation for compliance with these regulations. And then audit plan summary. So the EH&S compliance audit plan includes four projects that we want to execute this year. One for transmission, which will be the Clark Energy Center. One for the Canal Corporation, that will be the Western region at the Lions site. And then one canal construction project, the Glen Falls Feeder Canal Sinkhole. And then one NYPA administrative site, which is the White Plains office. So if we can go, the next slide is just the details on a little bit more detail on what the plan includes. And then the timing of when we'll be doing them. If you have any questions, but so internal audit is requesting that the audit committee approve the 2023 environmental health and safety compliance audit plan.
So anybody else have any questions? Seeing there's no more questions, I'll ask for a motion that the audit committee approve the NYPA and Canal 2023 environmental health and safety compliance audit plan.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next we have the consent agenda, which consists of meeting minutes, is now before the members for adoption. I ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
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 All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The next portion of our meeting will be held in executive session. The meeting will resume in open session approximately 30 minutes or 20 to 30 minutes to really just to close the meeting. But I ask now for a motion to conduct an executive session, discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation pursuant to section 105F of the Public Offices Law. I ask for a motion.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Second, I heard the second in there. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We're now in executive session. Okay, I'm gonna
I'll
ask.
move that we resume the meeting in open session.
Okay, is there a
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next meeting of the audit committee is to be held on July 18, 2023. And I now ask for a motion to close the meeting.
I'll also note there were no action taken during that executive session,
Very
but I'll
good. There was
move.
no action taken. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Tracy.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
There, second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. You're gonna take a
Well
short
done,
break,
Dennis.
John?
Yeah, why don't we take, what, 5-10 minutes?
Yep.
Okay.